Hi everybody, and welcome to today's chat. My name's Gail, and I'm a senior editor here at Understood. Today we're going to be talking about how to cope with back-to-school stress and anxiety, your child's and yours. And joining us today is clinical neuropsychologist Jerry Schultz, and he's going to be answering as many of your questions as possible. So if you have questions, just leave them in the box, just write them in the box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So Jerry, hi, how are you?
I'm great, Gail. Good to see you again, and hello to all you people out in internet land, wherever you may be.
Before we jump right in with questions, can you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure, very briefly. I'm a clinical pediatric neuropsychologist. For 35 years, I've specialized in the assessment and treatment of kids with learning and attention challenges. I've had a variety of wonderful opportunities to learn from and about kids and families. I spent a lot of time in schools working with teachers and kids. I'm the author of a book called Know Where to Hide, Why Kids with ADHD and LD Hate School and What We Can Do About It, which is particularly relevant to today's discussion because it deals a lot with the neurobiological impact of anxiety on emotions, behavior, and learning. I'm happy to be here with you again, Gail.
Terrific. We're happy to have you. I'm just going to start with sort of a bigger picture question, which is there a spike in anxiety at back-to-school time for kids with learning and attention issues?
It's a great question to start with. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a spike in anxiety among most kids and parents at back-to-school time. So it's important to put that into context. And maybe it's not anxiety, maybe it's excitement, maybe that's eager anticipation, but transitioning from the months of summer, whatever happens during that time, to the beginning of school is often a time that gets kids and families kind of revved up a little bit. So in terms of kids with learning problems and attention problems, I think it's quite likely that kind of baseline anxiety might be heightened in those kids and those families. But, a lot depends on the experiences these kids have had in the past 2 or 3 years in school, how they feel about their new teacher or teachers, how they feel about their social groups in school. Most importantly, for these kids that we're concerned about with learning and attention problems, it depends on how competent they feel going into this new experience, this new year of school. So, yes, I think there is a spike in anxiety among the population of kids that we care about, but there's so many factors that you have to keep in mind. I'm saying this because I don't want people in the audience to say, oh, we should expect this will happen to every kid. That's not necessarily true. It happens to a lot of kids, and it's probably more likely in the lives of the kids that we care about. But let's assume things are going to be good. Let's have a positive attitude about going back to school. That's important.
We have a question that I think is common to many parents of our parents of our kids, which is, how can you relieve some of the anxiety for your child without making them more anxious?
Also a good question. And I think that's an important question because often we start to have a discussion with kids about anxiety and we say things that we believe are going to lessen anxiety, but in fact they heighten anxiety, they make the reactions worse. The most important thing I can say today is that if you can find a way to anchor kids in previous times where they felt confident and competent, and those of you who have heard me before have heard those words many times from me, but if you can anchor kids in their own successes, they're less likely to feel anxious about what's to come. Anxiety has to do with a feeling of being out of control. So the more familiar you can make the task, the situation, the predicament that they may be in, the more familiar you can make kids with that, the more they have a sense of control. They say, oh, I've done something like that before. I've been in school before. I've read this book before. I've done this math before. And I did okay. So if you can have evidence that you can use, pull out work from a folder that kids use, that kids put their work in last year and say, this is the kind of thing you did last year. Look at your teacher's comments. Look at your smiley faces all over these papers. Look at what you said when we made notes in the margins last year about how you did on this thing. I think it's really important to anchor kids in those positive feelings. Otherwise, anxiety kind of, the brakes go out and anxiety can run downhill very fast and take kids with it.
Is there a difference between anxiety, stress, and fears about how things are going to go?
Yeah. Stress is really defined as the weight of that thing that you face that you're going to have to deal with. And so problems that have a lot of weight, that is, things that are going to be very difficult for you or things that are going to be outside of your zone of competence, if you don't feel like you have the ability to deal with those, then you can feel a lot more stress. You can feel a lot more anxiety, rather. So stress is really the pressure that's put upon you. You have to compare that to the resources you have as a person. And you say, well, that's a big challenge, but I know how to do this. So for example, if somebody said to me, Jerry, you want to go out in golf, I would say, wow, that puts a lot of pressure on me because I have absolutely no skill in that. So my anxiety level, if I were forced to go into that situation, would zoom right up because I would have a combination of a challenging task with a feeling that I don't really have any skill or competence in that area. So it's important. Good stress is a good thing because it puts us on the edge of our competence. It gets us ready for challenge. Good stress is what I had before you called me this morning to go on air for this program. It's the thing that made sure I had everything that I needed, that I was ready to go, that technology was working. So it's kind of a way to help our bodies and our brains prepare. Neutral stress in the middle zone there is a kind of stress that's that says, well, this is going to be challenging, but I'm pretty sure that I can handle it. It's the bad stress that I worry about, the toxic stress that we've talked about and understood a lot of times. The stress that says, this thing I'm facing is really big and I don't have the skill to do this, therefore I want to run away, I want to hide. And it's a natural protective mechanism of our human bodies and our brains. When we're faced with dangers, our brains and our bodies are primed to get us out of those situations, especially when we don't feel like we have the tools to handle those. So there's a continuum there, but it's important to put all that in perspective.
We have a question from a parent of a first grader who is having a really hard time making the transition to the point where the child is crying every day outside the classroom and the parent sort of literally has to, pull the child into the classroom. Do you have any advice on what to do when there's that kind of extreme reaction?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say about that, Gail, is that if this is a child, any child who's in school is in an environment where presumably you've got professionals, teachers and mental health specialists in a school, I hope, who understand stress and anxiety and fear and how it gets in the way of learning. So this is not a problem that parents should feel like they have to deal with alone. There are a lot of resources online, like the valuable information that comes from Understood and other fine sources. But first of all, use the resources around you to help with this. In that context, I think it's important to do the right amount of preparation to get kids into a situation that you believe is going to cause a lot of extreme anxiety. But if you've got a child who's crying every day and not able to go back into the classroom, I think it's important to think about how to get the classroom to the kid. So a child who's sitting in a chair in a hallway in a school, who's doing work, is in school, who's doing what's expected, and may not have to face the temporary anxiety being in that classroom. So that either there's something in the classroom that's scaring the child or pushing the child out, or some activity that's going on, and that you really have to look at that to see what that's about. If a child who's typically or chronically anxious in school and outside of school, that's a bigger problem and probably involves a consultation with some mental health person to help you create a plan for getting that child back into the classroom. It's painful for kids and parents and teachers to see a child sitting outside the classroom crying and unable to go back in. The good news is most kids get back in, and it takes a plan. So that's what I would encourage folks to think about.
Terrific. We have a parent who has a third grader who, I'm not sure what kind of learning or attention issue the child has, but the child gets upset at school because he feels like everybody is telling him what to do. In particular, to pay attention and to, attend to his work and to do what he needs to do in class. So he dreads going. And this parent says that they've tried to get a teacher to do, signals ahead of time, and it often doesn't happen. So any advice on how to get the school to sort of help come up with a way to not elicit that kind of response from a child?
Yeah. And that's a great question, because a lot of kids with attention and learning problems, in fact, have a lot of people around them telling them what to do. So this kid is probably describing the situation very accurately. The first thing that teachers have to do in school is to acknowledge this kid and acknowledge the power of his complaint. Some teachers might be tempted to say, well, I wouldn't tell you what to do if you just did what you were supposed to do. That's the feeling we have. And for most kids, that's true. We tell them what to do and they do it, and we don't have to come back and tell them to do it again. But for kids whose attention waxes and wanes, for kids who are scared about doing an academic task and it makes them confused and takes them off task, those are kids who have adults around them saying, Johnny, Susie, you have to do this. Why do I have to keep reminding you to do this? Why don't you just do this? And then we say, you're very capable. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing this, but you need to do this. I think the key to success, the way to unlock that negative dynamic, is for teachers and other caring people to say to a kid things like, John, are you doing what you need to be doing right now? And that places the attention on the child's ability to take control of a situation and handle the task that someone puts before him. It's a lot different to say to a child, are you doing what you need to be doing right now? It's a lot different to say that than saying, you need to be doing this. One is telling, one is asking, and it's really important. The question, as I posed it, is supposed to get a child to say, oh, no, I'm not, therefore I better. The next question a teacher can ask of a child that's very respectful is to say, John, do you need my help with this or somebody else's help, or is this something you think you can do by yourself? That's very respectful, and that's all part of the same dynamic that gets set up between some teachers and some kids. So asking a child if he's on task, not telling him to constantly get on task, and asking him if he needs more help or if he can do it himself. The other question a teacher can ask is or say to a child, you said you're on task, you said you can do this. I'm going to step away and let you work on this, but I'll come back and check on you because you may change your opinion. You may find that this is something you need some additional help, and that's what I'm here for. But I'm not here to breathe down your neck. I'm not here to hover over you, but I'm here to help you be independent. I'm here to help you take care of yourself, and that's my job. So I think when you change that dynamic and stop asking those questions about, why aren't you working? Why aren't you doing this? We have to break that cycle. It's not very helpful to the child. He's going home and crying to his parents. We want to break that cycle too.
So is that the kind of thing that a parent can discuss early in the school year with a teacher, to schedule a meeting and say, we've noticed that these are the kinds of things that our child responds to very well, and our child has a hard time responding when she feels, that she can't do it, or she's being judged, or whatever the term is. How can parents bring that up with teachers?
One of the things I would do is when a parent is having a conference with a teacher, is to not forget about last year's teacher, first of all. It's a great resource. If there's been if the child's been in school for more than a couple of years and there's been a really good experience with a previous teacher, let's not forget about using that person as a resource if you're in the same school and if you can have access to that person, because that teacher has gone through these trials and tribulations with that child. And presumably, if it's been a good year, that teacher has worked out a way to help that child deal with this problem, which is probably not a new one this year. So let's see if we can circle that teacher into the discussion, even if it's by a letter from a parent to last year's teacher in another school saying, can you write down how you saw Susie's problem and how you dealt with that and how you feel it led to her success. I'd like to share that as one professional's opinion with this new teacher she has this year. The other thing to do is, again, to be respectful of the teacher, to say, sometimes my child gets anxious. What's your view of that? How do you deal with that? Give teachers a chance to define their own philosophy and set of practices, which they've studied about, which they've practiced, which they ought to be good at, and then say, well, that's interesting and that sounds sensible. And may we also say that our son or our daughter has really benefited when a teacher in the past has ... She or he, our son or daughter, has been much more productive, much happier when they've been allowed to or encouraged to. That's something you feel comfortable with. It's hard for a good teacher to deny that kind of data. So that's the approach that I would take.
Well, that's terrific advice. This, I'm sure, is a common scenario in a lot of households, which is the beginning of school, and the child has stomach aches and is spending half the day going to the nurse's office, or doesn't want to leave the house in the morning and complains they don't feel good. What do parents do to sort of move that along and get their child to sort of push through that and go to school without it being a real problem?
Yeah. Well, since some of the people in the audience may have kids that aren't back at school yet, I think it's important to think about this proactively. If you know that you have a child who's likely to exhibit those kind of behaviors that you described, it's important to reach out to the school, even in the days or weeks before school starts, to say, I want to minimize this problem. I don't want to tell you what to do, but I'm going to say this is a problem that we've had year after year, or that we've had, it's kind of its head has popped up over the summer, so we'd like your advice and cooperation on this. Because if the teachers and mental health professionals at school know this is a problem, there are different ways that they ought to and can respond to a child who's got this kind of increasing anxiety about it. If school's already started and the child is resisting school, it's important to understand that the message has to be, school is not optional for you, honey. School is something that you have to do. And it's also important to respect the child, to say, you're showing us by what you're saying or what you're doing that this is difficult for you. This is a challenge for you. But we believe in you, and we have ideas, and your teachers have ideas about how this is going to get better, because it will. We know that. It's really, really important to set that expectation. And to let the child know that the feeling is legitimate, that you're not judging it, that you're not crying or getting upset as a parent about this, and you're saying there will be a solution. It will take time, but staying home from school is not an option. Really, really important for parents to get their kids in school. And that may mean working in a small room for a certain amount of the day. That may mean, in the most extreme cases where a child is an older child who's refusing to go to school, make sure that school comes home to that child. That is, classroom assignments go home, teachers communicate with the child who's at home, school goes on, but the child may be having a temporary situational difficulty being in that place called school. But the concept never stops. The longer a child is away from school, the more likely it is that the child will stay away from school, and the more difficult it will be to get that kid back into school where he or she belongs.
Great advice. I have a question here from a parent that is a really tough one. They have a child who is extremely anxious about being in school because they're scared that something bad's going to happen, in terms of their own safety, or a school shooting. This is a middle schooler, and the child does not want to go to school, would like to be homeschooled or do online schooling, and the parents don't know how to respond to this, or whether it's a good idea to um, switch gears and not send their child to the physical school?
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's a common question among too many kids in the world we live in today. The idea of school being a safe place has been something that's been a time-honored tradition and value, but in recent times, unfortunately, as we know, that's been challenged. So the child has a right to be worried, and that's very, very unfortunate. Most schools have some way of communicating to kids and to parents how and why school continues to be a safe place for most kids. And that's factual. School does continue to be a safe place for most kids in this country. So again, I would reach out to the school to say, what can you as a school do to help me with as much certainty as you can explain to my child and convince my child and convince me, frankly, as a parent, that school is a safe place. Talk about safety features, talk about procedures you have in place to keep kids safe. That being said, some kids are so anxious and so worried about this because, unfortunately, it becomes a bit of a reality in this world. It may be important to say to the child, how do we keep school going? How do we keep you safe? Does that mean that you should be at home or with another group of kids in a homeschool situation? But how do we keep the relationship with school going? How do we keep the curriculum going? I think it's important to try to keep things as normal as possible. So what I'm saying is that may mean for a while a highly anxious child may need to be at home to feel more comfortable until the rhythm gets going. Homework assignments go home. Homeschooling may be supplemented by some school-delivered curriculum. And when a child feels more comfortable and more safe, I think it's important to think about moving back into the direction of a more typical school experience because I believe there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value in homeschooling for a lot of kids, but most kids go to school and they get up and they go and they're safe and they do their job and they work hard and they have fun. That's where I'd like to see most kids. But if you have a kid whose anxiety means that learning is impaired or not even possible, and sometimes kids need to be taken out of or kept away from the environment that creates that fear factor in the first place, because a child needs to be safe in order to learn. So it has to be dealt with on an individual case-by-case basis, obviously. But I would not make that decision alone. I would seek out the consultation of a pediatrician or a mental health counselor, and certainly talk to the school folks. I would not force the child to go into a situation that he's absolutely terrified about, because that's not going to do anybody any good. That kind of immersion therapy where you throw a kid back into a dangerous environment doesn't generally make kids feel less anxious. It makes them feel more anxious.
Right. Thanks for that answer. It's going to be very helpful for a lot of parents. We have a parent who has a young school-aged child who's having trouble or anxiety about transitions within the school day. So moving from classroom to classroom, adjusting to different teachers. What do you do to help a child who's feeling a little overwhelmed by the task of going through the school day?
Yeah, transitions are interesting to deal with. The first thing you have to understand is what makes transitions difficult. One thing may be that things are going so well in the previous class, the activity going on before the transition, that a child's in a state of flow, his brain is working well, she's having a great time, she doesn't want to stop. And who would want to give up that feeling? So transition means you have to stop what you're doing, think about changing gears, step into another environment or two environments sometimes, be with new people, and then make the readjustment to that. So if that's the case, if what's going on in, let's say, call it situation A, is very pleasant and fun, and the child is having a hard time stopping that, then you have to do some kind of countdown activities. You have 10 minutes to finish, you have 5 minutes to finish, you need to get ready to do that. Transition can also mean the period of time between A and C, where you've been and where you're going. B may be this no man's land of the hallway, of noise, of anxiety-producing social challenges. You have to understand whether transition problems are due to comfort in A, competence in A, or challenges with B, the intermediate environment, or what's coming next, the anxieties about the unknown in activity C, the next thing that you're going to. If it's anxiety about what's happening in C, then again, teachers have a helpful role to play in helping kids get ready to say, you're going to Mrs. Johnson's English class, C, and what she's got planned today for you and for the other kids is really exciting. She's actually given me a picture of something that she's going to show the kids in class, and she's going to ask them a question about it. So here's the question she's going to ask. As you make your way toward her class, think of an answer that you might have to that question. And by doing that kind of thing, you're building a bridge of competence and confidence to see the difficult transition period in a child's life. So you really have to analyze where the fear factor comes into play when you're thinking about problems with transition. That's a phrase that's often used very generally, and it really requires a little bit more of a scientific approach to drill down to find out exactly what the cause of. Maybe a child's afraid to travel from one place to another and needs a buddy in the hallway, an adult or an older child. Maybe a child's worried because the transition in the hallway takes longer than that child has to make it. Child has to go to her locker, has to get books, has to get to the next class, and just the rushing that's involved and the commotion that's involved can make her anxious. So again, I hope I'm making the case that it's not just about transition. It's the question you have to ask is, what is it about transition that's making it difficult? And then the plan has to address that. I hope that's helpful, Gail.
Absolutely. We have time for one more question.
Why isn't this a longer program?
We'll have to come back and do part 2.
Okay, great.
So this question is sort of a carryover from the one before, which is, what do you do when you have a child who is overwhelmed by new things across the board? So new sights, new sounds, new seating arrangements, new kids in class. How do you prepare a kid to sort of take in all of that new stuff without becoming overly anxious?
Yeah. One of the things not to do is try to prepare your kid for anything that might happen, because that's impossible. You never know what's going to happen. What you have to think about is how you best prepare a child for the things that are going to happen. One of the reasons that anxiety zooms up in a lot of kids is because they feel like they don't have a sense of control over things. So a parent who knows they have a child who has difficulty moving from one activity to another and gets anxious at almost everything, I think it's important to equip that child with some kind of rating scale, some kind of ranking, and to normalize anxiety. They say most people feel nervous or anxious when they get into new situations. The key here is to keep yourself out of that really highly anxious zone. And if we give numbers to that, that could be 7, 8, 9, 10 on a 10-point scale. So parents can work with their child to say, you're going to move from situation A to situation B. How would you rate your anxiety just when you think about that? You know, you're going from school to a field trip. What is your brain telling you about how worried you need to be about that? And you can use a 5-point scale or a 10-point scale to have the child rated. And the child says, that's a 10. That's really a big, scary thing for me. The next question a parent or a counselor or a teacher has to ask is, how do you get yourself from that 10, which means there's no way I can do this, down to some lower number, which means maybe there's a way I can do this. I think you have to equip the kid with a tool to use in each new situation that becomes somewhat of a ritual for the child, because this kid is going to be facing new situations for the rest of her life. And it's important to have some tool to say, well, this thing I'm supposed to do or I'm thinking about doing is really making me highly anxious, but I have things I can do. I have deep breathing exercises. I can hold myself or hug myself. I can close my eyes and imagine that I'm in a place where I feel more comfortable. I can use this squeeze toy or fidget toy to try to get my anxiety level down. I can think of a joke that someone told me and laugh. Because I've learned that laughing makes it really hard to feel anxious. There are a lot of things that have to be in a child's toolbox to give him or her the power to get control over those situations in a kind of a ritualized kind of way. What do I do when I get into a situation where I'm feeling like this? And if you have enough successes built into the child's experience repertoire, you can say to a child, remember when that happened in situation Z? This is situation X. Can you bring any of those good feelings or those skills into play now? Because this is what you need to do to be successful. So I think it's a matter of understanding the cause of the anxiety and giving kids a tool to use to get some control over the situation.
Such good advice, all of it. And I'm really sorry we have to stop for right now, for today. If you guys have questions, however, you can ask them in our community at u.org/community. If you want to see any of the other chats, you can find them at u.org/calendar. Jerry, I want to thank you so much. This has been just a great chat.
Thank you, Gail. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and good luck to the folks who are getting the opportunity to watch this webinar. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.